a really exciting panel next, but before we get started, I would love everyone to just stand up really quickly. Stand up. We just heard some really deep stuff. So whatever we need to do to let it out, I invite you to wiggle your hands, maybe do some stretches. All right. Wiggle those fingers, shake those feet, move those hips. Get that flow after lunch going. And while I have you standing, let's see if we remember. People in the front, let me hear you grunt. People in the middle, let me hear you sizzle. People in the rear, let me hear you cheer. Ah, do it, do it, do it, do it. Ah, do it, do it, do it, do it. And then we say, go, heel calm, friends, go. Oh, friends, go, heel calm, friends. Let's try it again. People in the front, let me hear you grunt. People in the middle, let me hear you sizzle. People in the rear, let me hear you cheer. Ah, do it, do it, do it, do it. Ah, do it, do it, do it, do it. Go, heel calm, friends, go. Bravo. Take a seat, and take a load off your feet. Take a seat, and take that load off your feet. Coming up next, we have a really exciting panel titled Empowering Advocacy in EdTech and MedTech. I'm sure this is going to be very interesting and aligned with everything we've been talking about this week. Please join me in welcoming the session's moderator, Igor Zijan, and esteemed speakers, Mark G. and Dr. Brian T. Long.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for being here for the panel discussion. We are going to, of course, continue with the advocacy in overall industry. And we are just going to present ourselves again, what we are doing, how are we participating in advocacy, how do we see advocacy from, our point of view, because we are from, different environments. Of course, we are working on the big picture and the big backgrounds, and two colleagues will present as well their own backgrounds. So that I tell just briefly what we are doing. It means we are working, behind, government programs. We are pushing, big initiatives through the European Parliament, through the European Commission, through the United States Senate, and so on. It means we are bothering big guys, so then they are bothering you. Of course, we are working on legislations. We are working on big policies. We are changing, the big picture, which then impacts, of course, in the United States, different departments, in the Europe, different ministry, and this has impact, of course, then to, every one of you. Of course, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of people to achieve legislations, as in the United States and the Senate. You know how it is. And we had, big success with the Biden administration in our Havana Syndrome program, which was, tremendous achievement for all of you. It means for everyone, for entire United States, and now we are somehow pushing these initiatives forward to European Commission, to Switzerland, to Canada, even to Russia, even that now is there, pretty tough time because of the war and everything what is happening. But of course, if you want to make a big picture working, then you need everyone you need everyone in the part of the legacy, you need everyone in the part of the policy. And to, of course, be successful in this, we are connecting big players like United Nations, Amnesty International, and as already mentioned, government programs, of course, and we are more sufficient because it's not just easy to call Mr. Putin and say, do you have 2 minutes? We would just like to change something. Or this would be super easy. So in the big picture, this is what we do. Of course, we have then our own internal programs, which are as well some kind of model which we are presenting as well then to the governments, model of the success. Yes, more or less, this is what I would say until for now. Let's say about the company system of all and about myself, and I'm just going to give the word to you.
Okay, so today we wanted to really start out with advocacy, and we're talking about advocacy within MedTech and EdTech. But let's break down advocacy first. All of us in here are advocating for either a specific population or for a cause. And so it is important that we understand how important it is to enlighten others on what we're trying to accomplish. Because that's what advocacy is about, is I'm shining light in dark places where people don't understand why are we doing what we do. And so we become those superheroes that present that data. We present, those stories, those moments to where we're being change agents for others who may not necessarily be able to speak on their own behalf. So the first thing we wanted to do before we started to go into advocacy for MedTech and EdTech was we wanted to get you to understand that we advocate for different things. My main advocacy right now is to advocate for those who are formerly incarcerated, those who have mental health issues. As a therapist, as a co-founder for Path to Recovery, one of the main things that I've recognized is that people, especially in Black and brown communities, have been told for so long, pray about it. And because they've been told to pray about it, no one has advocated for them to get the services that they needed. And because of that challenge, it has made it very difficult for Black and brown communities to be able to go get the assistance that they need. And so fear came until people started stepping up and saying, let's advocate for change. Let's advocate instead of just praying. Let's go ahead and seek someone who can give you the answers and the guidance so that you can successfully heal and get through those traumas. That's why we're here today. We all have been advocating in our specific areas to encourage people to turn on the light in those dark places. I've learned a lot of things from every last one of you. Some things I may not be able to relate, but because you were the advocate for change, I understood when you turned the light on. So before we shift, I know that's the topic. Before we shift, we wanted to remind you that advocacy is important, especially to the change agent that's bringing the information to the dark world.
Really couldn't have asked for a better way to go into one of the things that I think is an important pillar of advocacy. Sort of as he was talking about, I think a lot of this quote by Henry Ward Beecher, liberty is the soul's right to breathe, and when it cannot take a long breath, laws are girded too tight, and man is a syncope, which is like when your heart skips a beat. It's an irregularity in what should be a breathing of life. I think the fact that he used syncope is really extremely pertinent, especially being MedTech and EdTech. Because one of the lenses that, of course, I look at, like I mentioned, is I do a lot of racism research into social equity in cannabis. And it's all about laws, which Of course, Igor was talking a lot about laws as really a way of helping almost to advocate for everyone as a society. But that implies that laws are made justly. And that also implies that the people making the laws have a panoptic, this really amazing ability to see everything in all externalities. And that's just not true. Even with the best intentions, right? The best laid plans of mice and men, they go awry. And so, especially within the specific verticals, I think two of the most, well, not two, but with some of these intersection is we were starting to really use big data in both of these instances and technology, which was kind of his point that he brought up. He's like, now we have digital therapeutics, and I'll let him talk more on that. Or like, he talks about the democratization of education. We were prepping, and I'm like, that makes so much sense. Like, so we were having a discussion with someone else about Duolingo. The founder of Duolingo, which I am like been using for years because it's fun, then never wanted to make money, just wanted to make the best thing possible. But in doing so, was able to democratize the ability to learn a language. Parlo più italiano perché Duolingo. Not well, but I sort of understand it because some dude was like, you know what? People all over the world should have access to this kind of information. And so what we talked about is like advocacy is working in the background to make sure that everyone is able to benefit from things. And as it applies to MedTech and EdTech, it's a lot of like making sure that we're getting this big data in a way that's fair, because we're already seeing massive racial discrepancies in the way that MedTech's data is done. I'm a genomicist. I remember a paper, despite them having the data, they're like, and we excluded all non-white people. Why? I don't know. I sent a very strongly worded email to the author and never heard back. But like, that's unacceptable. And it's unacceptable that we continue to propagate these systems that have led to so much brokenness. And so with this proliferation of the democratization of knowledge, if it's unevenly done, we're going to continue to exacerbate that which already exists. So in my opinion, advocacy is making sure that everyone has access to light. That it's not like, oh, some people have the internet and other people are reading by candlelight. It's that everyone can pull on their phone and get updates on what's going on and see the greatest breakthroughs and the newest breakthroughs, and then making sure that we get the cost down for all these interventions that have massive societal implications so that everyone can benefit. I mean, something as simple as not having drinking water, that's insane. Like, I have so much water in front of me, right? How can we say that you can get a good education if you can't do that? So in some ways, I guess the way I see it is none of this is really disparate. But EdTech and MedTech are the two areas where we have the most ability to close this gap. And so, I mean, I think Brian has some really great thoughts on digital therapeutics, which I'll let him talk about.
So I'm interactive. Even when I preach or doing different things, I like people to talk to me because it's been lunch and we got the itis and start kicking in. I'm going to tell you, you start shaking and rubbing your leg and you be like, God, please, I'm trying to make it. I'm trying to make it. And I'm just telling you, anytime I've spoke somewhere and after they do lunch and stuff, I be like, look, we ain't about to go to sleep in here. We about to have a party. So I'm going to tell you straight up. I know the panelists and people that come up here after lunch is very challenging. So I'm not going to sit here and let us just talk. We going to ask y'all questions. Do you know what MedTech or EdTech is? Anybody know what MedTech or EdTech is? Just be honest. Yes, no, shake your head like, no, I don't. Yes, so tell me, what's MedTech, EdTech?
At least in my understanding, MedTech is technological applications that are used for medical purposes, improving people's access to health interventions or knowledge about them. EdTech is doing a similar thing, but for education in new skills or programs.
Perfect. Anybody else want to add to that? Give them a hand clap. Give them a hand clap. Come on, come on. Anybody else? And I'm going to do like my students. No answer is the wrong answer. All right? I just want your point of view. Go ahead.
All right. Like educational technology, like relating to my discussion today, is the use of technology in passing across educational information. Like we talked about ChatGPT, online teaching, learning, Turnitin technology for checking similarity indexes, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So I don't want to talk about MedTech because he's the specialist. He's talked about it already.
Okay. See. Oh, my goodness.
I actually have a question. My brain operates on visual. I'm a visual learner.
Okay.
and forgive my ignorance on this topic, but would that be like during COVID, there were a lot of computerized little robots that would go into the rooms and have speakers and cameras where people could interact with people dying, and the nurse didn't have to go in, and she could, okay.
Yes.
EdTech is like, if you're using technology, it's like life science that isn't biopharma, so it's everything that isn't drugs or gene therapies or biologics, which would be something like that. So MedTech is the most blanket of the life science things, and then if you're specifically looking at like interventions that are not computers or that don't involve like something physical, but it's more just purely biological, it's not MedTech anymore.
So give everybody a hand clap that answer. Come on, come on, come on. I told you I got to keep you interactive because I don't want nobody snoring during this session. All right, so let's look at it from this perspective. So from the medical standpoint, during COVID, it was very challenging to have access to services because you got to think, you know, hospital rooms was filled with people who were struggling, not just with COVID, but with other injuries and other issues. So when we're thinking about MedTech, we're making, you know, health accessible not only to the medical, where we're dealing with people going into the hospitals, but we're making health accessible in the mental.
Right.
That's where telehealth came into perspective. Think about it like this. I just gave you an example earlier about how black and brown people thought it was taboo. Well, now with telehealth in place, no one really knows that I'm getting services.
Yeah, and I mean, the anonymity there is, it has a staggering effect, but also to your point, right now, you don't have to be in a hospital to get service. Like, I don't have to go into a doctor's office. Like, last year, I tore my meniscus again, and I couldn't, my parents were like, why don't you go to the doctor? I'm like, I cannot walk 1,000 steps. I'm not going to the doctor. And it's like, MedTech helps with that, and that's all what, you know.
Usually already works opposite, or let's say in modern countries, Switzerland, etc., you already need to pre-order yourself first through the telemed. It means first you call the doctor, and first they address you even to pharmaceuticals. So you go to pharmaceuticals, they ask you, were you already at the pharmaceuticals? What did they say? Did you try with the telemedicine? So you need to call actually, and they ask you what exactly is wrong with you. They give instruction what exactly to do. And if you really need the help, then you go to the doctor. So it means the process is really changing.
Well, and it really reduces the cost of access. I mean, as a pharmacoeconomist, I could not talk about this. I think a great example is postpartum. Like women after giving birth, basically, if they have these workout programs, and they're like, yeah, if you have these virtual workout sessions for women, first of all, they're not cost effective because the specialists are so concentrated and diffused that they can just upload. I have a client who does it. She uploaded an entire workout program for women who just gave birth. And she has virtual clinics. And there's a paper that talks about, like, by the third woman, you've saved, like, it's like $3,000 a person or something. And everyone, it just goes up. And they don't have a 3-person class. They have a 40-person class, a 200-person class, an asynchronous class. So 3,000 people could be seeing in a week. 30 million people could see in a week. And that's, I mean, I think a lot about advocacy is making sure that it's not just people who have cell phones and a lot of money who can do that, but rather everyone.
So I heard you say that not only is it making it more cost effective through the MedTech avenue, but it also allows a lot of people to have access to the same resources no matter where they are.
Well, think about like a university, right? Used to, if you wanted to get educated, you had to be super rich. People couldn't read most of the population until like 100 years ago. I think the literacy rate just hit over 50% globally, like in the last 100 years. And now it's just like, well, of course you can learn to read. We have cell phones. But if you don't have a cell phone.
So in the MedTech space, I use some of that with like physical therapy at home, where you can do your stretching and strengthening exercises. But how is MedTech looking at potentially impacting behavior so that people actually complete those programs? So what I've noticed in administering them, people start them, and they may be a 12-week program, but they only get through like 6 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they just kind of fall off the bandwagon. So that the utilization kind of just dwindles over time, and then you get stagnant at like a 30% or 22% mark of the eligible population who can use it, you're not getting, upwards of 50%, 60%. So how are y'all helping with looking at it from a behavioral standpoint?
Buy-in, I think. I would agree with what he said earlier, that you just need to get buy-in from everyone. That's where EdTech actually becomes helpful, because if you explain to people why they're doing things, or Igor was talking about how, like, when we make laws, we don't tell people why they make the laws. There's like, it's a law, follow it or go to jail. But if you're like, hey, people who completed the whole thing in general had less pain 9 months later or 2 years later, or you have your insurance company, if they prove that they did it, they do, they give them a rebate. You just create incentives. But also EdTech gives us a lot of information about how to help people shape behaviors, right? It's almost like there's the ancillary field, because from EdTech we understand how to maximize education. We levy those lessons into MedTech, and then we're helping explain to people. And I mean, as you're a therapist, what are your thoughts?
So I was going to say this. Let's be honest. People do what they want to do when they want to do it. So he talked about buy-in, and we're talking about behaviors. And a lot of times people fall off on the bandwagon. They in it, they're excited, just like their New Year's revolution. They're excited to get started on something. I'm gonna do this the first of the year, and I promise you I'm gonna cook every day. Next week, they stopped. The buy-in is the problem is not just the buy-in. The problem is that a lot of times people don't make changes until they lose something.
True.
Until it hurts, until it costs you, until it's at a point to where there's no other direction, and I've tried this, I've tried it myself, and then something in my mind says, you know what, I'm still going insane because I'm doing the same thing, getting the same objective, and nothing is changing. So it has to be not just a buy-in, but it has to be to the point to where people are understanding that this is something that has to happen or else.
It's impacting changing behavior, because understanding things differently, you will react differently. And if you react differently, then you will have different results. And this is in basic, it's really simple. Let's say probably no one ever explained to, let's say, okay, in the basic, we know why we have laws and why we have regulations, but we are forming laws and regulations with a big science data behind, I would say, this logic. Why? Because we somehow need to form society, and we have 8 billion people on this world, plus, I'm not sure how many companies we have. Imagine that every day comes one entrepreneur. He says, I have a really great idea, and this is definitely going to be beneficial. So we somehow need to trace what is happening. And now that we all do not just come into the mass of the products, buying things, exchanging the data, which is now the most sensible thing, especially at our children, etc., we need to have some kind of regulation, some kind of following what we are exactly doing. And that's why now we are fighting as well through the GDPR data and so on, what information can we get back, what we can give forward, and so on. But those are still important data. And everyone is going to say, like I said to them before, do not break the law, do not break regulation, which is correct. But usually they are made as well that they form you, that you're actually following one way, which is actually the most beneficial for you as well. Why? Because if it's beneficial for you, then the foundings have a sense. Government doesn't want to lose money. Government doesn't want to make a project for 4 years and then losing 10,000 of the patients. They would like to make things the most efficient way as possible. And when they're studying the law and regulations, we are going through the thousands and thousands of studies before we decide and say, okay, we see here the weak points. Here we would like to make some changes, but we need to know exactly what this is going to cause as well in the future. Because if government opens the program and they say, okay, we are going to give $800 billion for the foundation of your programs and your ideas, and then nothing comes into realization and 10 million people dies because of this, then we don't have a positive outcome. And so following the laws, regulations, it means advocacy. Behavior, it means is bringing you towards the goal on the most efficient way with the highest quality possible. And you will save a lot of time. It's a nice idea, do not break the law, break the rules. We all like to do this sometimes, but it's going to save you a lot of money, a lot of time. if you do not try to do something like this, and the quality of your work is going to be super high. And this is why it's, I would say, so important to follow it. And then you are bringing this logic as well to your group, to your people, and so on and so on. And this goes forward and forward. And then in the end, the results are really awesome. And this is what we can see actually here today.
So it's going to sound unrelated, but it isn't. I don't keep ice cream in my freezer. See, as a behavioral economist, there are things called nudges. And if I don't have ice cream in my freezer, I won't eat it. So if you ask, how do you get people to do it? Like, one thing is, if people have a more expensive gym membership, they go more. You're like, oh, I'm paying a decent amount. So in terms of how do you get people to follow through with these things, it's much like he was saying. You elucidate the full suite of what their options do and then help them understand the long-term effects of it. And you just make it very salient, which is why EdTech is so important. Because from EdTech, as a neuroscientist, I love it. We are getting volumes of data about what people respond to in ways that realistically we will never get in MedTech, because nobody sits there and goes, do you care about the UX UI? Until the EdTech people were like, I'm sorry, user experience, user interface. EdTech people were the ones who were like, guess what? People learn better when things are pretty and colorful, and they learn better when you give them multimodalities, and they learn better when X, Y, Z. And there is a huge focus right now on a lot of different verticals, but EdTech funding is not actually getting the same amount of love as a lot of other spaces. However, the paradigms from EdTech are. So what's happening is, even though there aren't like a ton of companies getting funded per se, a lot of the things that we're learning from them, other spaces are going, oh. Because they finally were like, maybe we should look at teachers if we're trying to teach people things. I don't know, weird concept. And it's, I mean, realistically, like you all laugh, but it's like, you use teachers or parents, you all use little behavioral nudges all day long to get your kids to do things. On a societal level, that's what a law is. It's just a nudge to get us to do something. That's what some degrees like fines, taxes, what I talked about, insurance rebates. As a therapist, right? I'm sure you deal all day long with helping your patients help themselves.
Yes.
I don't want to take away from what you guys are talking about, but I do want to bring something up. So I think it's great. I agree. The numbers that you're putting out there, that more people can do exercise, more people can help themselves with PT. But there's also like leveraging the responsibility, right? So I'll give an example. If you want to get an MRI, you have to go to so many PT sessions before some insurances will approve your MRI. Not in all cases, but that happens sometimes. If the person at home is left up to doing that and they don't complete it, and a year from now they need an MRI, they have to start all over again. And unless they're told that, you don't know that as a consumer. Right. So I share this with you to say, if we're going to really look at EdTech and MedTech and use it into its powerful ways, I think that we have to leverage the responsibility. Another example, if you are at home doing PT, I'm just going to stick with that one. If you're doing PT and it's not getting better, there have been times where they found out, oh my gosh, there's a broken femur. Well, if you're at home doing your EdTech, MedTech version, nobody's touching you, seeing you, figuring that out. So what's the level of responsibility? How do we build in the next piece? Because I'm sure you guys would all agree, yes, it's a powerful force, but how do we maintain that integrity and responsibility?
I mean, I was just going to say AI. That's where, like, going back to pharmacoeconomics, going back to AI, going back to behavioral economics, like, these are the lens that I study all day long. And if you do it right, you get a good system of clinical decision support tools, what I make, where it's like you were saying, oh, hey, you haven't gotten better in 3 weeks. That's not normal. We're going to schedule you for an x-ray. I don't know.
And I mean, in MRIs, it actually has a bit of sense because there is as well the protection of the health policy involved into why insurance companies or hospitals, they do not prescribe the MRI. This is because of the amount of the radiation. And they are trying to do everything to avoid that people would just be scanned. We are talking about sensitivity information and so on and so on. So we now have, let's say, MRIs 20 years, 25 years on the market, or we still do not know the side effects, but we just know that the amount of the radiation is so high that we are trying to avoid it if possible. Let's say this is going to answer one of your questions.
And I think that let's look at technology is always evolving. And so that's where where MedTech kicks into, where you have different types of treatment that can assess those things, even if a person's at home. That those things through technology can give proper diagnosis, just like with mental health. He was alluding to about the behavior change. And a lot of times in my practice, what I've learned is that people don't necessarily want to change, but life had happened and it made them just say, I had to change. I didn't stop doing certain things and wanting to lose weight until really one day I took my shirt off and I was just like, dang, I'm really fat. You were fat? Oh, I was fat. But the reason why and when I say that is the perception of the person. And so when I perceive myself to be something that I did not want to be, then that's when I was like, I had to change the behaviors. And the behavior has to be wanting to make that change. So when I'm dealing with other people on a mental health level, I can't force a person to take the steps forward. I can only educate you from my perspective of this is what's going to happen if you don't take these steps forward. Now, if you want to take a step forward and you fall back and make a mistake, my job as the professional through MedTech is to carry you through that process that you're not able to get to that water again. But as long as the person has the ability to move forward and the ability to fight for their own selves, then they'll be able to, regardless of what technology that comes out there, they will begin to get the resources and the help that they need.
What I would just quickly say, and to his point, technology makes it easier with EdTech to understand how to make it easier for them to help themselves, which a lot of advocacy is just empowering other people, giving them the power to change their own station.
Yes. Yes.
Tori, what's up?
Am I next?
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to point out something when you were talking earlier, Dr. Bryan, and I mean, it's for the whole panel too, but you talked about prayer and about, praying and not going to the doctor. But I also wanted to point out that the MedTech made it possible during COVID for people to either reconnect or stay connected to their spiritual choice. I know the churches, and I'm wondering, if you've seen that, and that there is that definite connection between praying in your mindset and having that closeness with your higher power. I personally believe in God, but however you choose to believe, but how it is very important to your overall wellness and getting better, And do you see a lot more people staying or returning and continuing into that spiritual journey along with their medical or their therapist? That could go for the whole panel, but just because you brought up the prayer.
Me personally, I think that a lot of times the pandemic opened up for that avenue for people to have access to that, way of getting what they need. And it has, what I've seen is a lot of times, whether it was through spirituality, whether it was through medical, whether it's through mental health, more people are willing and eager to get the assistance because now it's in the privacy of my own home. Now it's in the privacy of wherever I'm at. I'm able to do what I need to do and get the same fulfillment that I could have got by just standing in a long line. Now I have the access by just clicking a button and going to get what I need. So for me personally, I have seen more people entertain, MedTech and entertain EdTech. And I wanted to say this point about EdTech. Do we all remember how back in the days when people did not go to regular schooling, but they said online schooling, some of us used to say that their schooling wasn't legitimate? People remember that? Remember, yeah, I know I'm not the only one that remembers that. If somebody said I did online schooling, we was just like, yeah, you didn't go to a real school. I remember that because during my shift, I could only really go to online school after a while. And so, now online schooling has become one of the most legitimate avenues to go forward because it meets the needs of those people who are in the working environment or who are, have kids and they have different things going on. So online schooling from EdTech has allowed people who would not have access to those services in a different in a different way to get the same education that someone has went in a regular institution to get those services.
This comes with the time. Let's say like now you're somehow used to it on the system, which we were impacted by 80s, 90s, year 2000. So this what we are promoting today, you will feel in your lives if you want it or not. And that's why we are bothering everyone. We are placing so much effort into the health policies, into the healthy lifestyle, not only to get the access on the cheapest and fastest way possible, but we started focusing on the preventive. Let's say there are big programs which are going now already through the Africa, and they are considering insurance policies and insurance companies, and they are actually bringing the solution to the healthcare with providing the insurance policies and insurance services to users much cheaper if they are exercising, if they are eating healthy food. So it means you have application and you're literally traced. You can participate in the insurance program, and you are literally traced if you're exercising, if you're running, if you're eating healthy, and so on. And your entire health program is traced. And if you have, of course, if you're investing to your health, you have cheaper insurance, you have cheaper health services, and so on, which is much more successful in the end because no one doesn't want to treat the cancer. We would like to avoid having cancers. We would like to avoid having our health issues, sir.
Well, and also, those are the nudges. That's great examples of nudges. And plus, before we go more questions, the person who benefits the most are clinicians a lot of times. Like if all of a sudden, if you're a teacher and your students have way better EdTech materials and they're struggling, you don't have to go and be like super worried about it. You can be like, yeah, download this app, play a game for 30 minutes. If you're a physician and you're like, ooh, I might have to call you back in, or if you're doing auditory work, right? Like you're an auditory specialist working with, deaf people, as we were talking about earlier, and all of a sudden there's way better materials, they're decentralized, that just lets you be supported better. So ultimately everyone wins. And we've been talking about like reducing the burden of going to clinicians, but also that means that when they go there, they have more resources, they have decentralized resources, and they're really seeing the people who need them the most, as opposed to people who are like, look, dude, you could have been done with an app. Whereas there's like, okay, you have a broken femur, we cannot fix that with an app. You come in and we're gonna set it.
So in implementing wellness programs for various companies and utilizing a lot of MedTech, but what I have seen is clinicians, the physicians that are out there, if somebody goes to see them, they're not recommending to use the MedTech. They're recommending go to a physical location. So how is that being shaped right now? Because all these applications are out there and they can do so much and they help, but the physicians themselves are recommending go to see their buddy.
I mean, I love clinical decision support tools, but I really hope in the next 5 or 10 years that the physicians and clinicians will increasingly be leveraging AI or other sources to be like, okay, well, in this instance, because if you had a clinical decision support tool, it would no longer be the physician doing it. It's now supported, so they can see, oh, well, for you, because a lot of times they just don't know. And here's the thing: they can't get sued. We had a discussion about this. They can't get sued, so they can't recommend anything they don't know everything about, and it has to be completely verified by the AMA, or they're like, no. But if you have a CDST, now it's a computer recommending it, and you can be like, well, if they're validated, that gives them the sort of cover, I guess, to be able to make the right decision, if that makes sense. But it's a problem. It's a real problem. In fact, it's a wicked problem. And it's one that I've had a lot of discussions with people about. And part of the problem is the reticence in education. Part of the problem is the people teaching medical education. It takes a long time to get education to shift. So again, I see them as two sides of the same coin. Wait.
Thank you. To piggyback off of what your panelist has brought here, in EdTech and MedTech, coming from someone in the healthcare industry, so often, it's not necessarily that the EdTech or the MedTech is the problem. As Mark has mentioned, it may be the physician or the perceived conception or perception of the providing healthcare provider that the population that they're serving is just not going to use it. So how do you get past implicit bias in the use of EdTech and MedTech for healthcare providers relating to the communities that are in the most proximity to them, to get them to serve who their communities are instead of the communities that they want to choose to serve.
I mean, maybe it's optimistic of me and maybe I'm an idealist, but I really think the insurance companies are going to go, wow, you're leaving a lot of money on the table by not treating these people. We don't like that. Deny that woman care again, see if we don't sue you.
Well,
And then
the
that
data,
enforcement mechanisms like Igor would talk about. You change the law and you say, if a woman has these biomarkers, she's at high risk for ovarian, you need to test her.
Then you call us.
that's true. That's true. And I think that all of us in this room are those disruptors to bring in the communities that are underserved. But we have to look at the reality of the current situation that we are in. We would not all be in this room if MedTech and EdTech were used in ways that serve the communities that are in proximity to the healthcare providers that are in the communities that they are in. There is a choice.
It's much more difficult to lie today.
It is.
Today
Yes,
it's much
it's
more
hard.
difficult to lie. 20 years ago it was easy to lie, and it was much less overview through entire world what exactly is happening. Every hospital had their own successful or unsuccessful theory. They have their own lobbyists, etc. Now we have world of universities, which is functioning already, let's say, 20 years, even that is, I would say, more, I mean, it's a lot of data which cannot be processed, or they're not processed as they could be, but it's much more difficult to lie. We're talking about studies, we're talking about information system technology, and we're talking about the traceability that we developed actually in the last 20 years, which before unfortunately didn't succeed. Or not it didn't succeed, it was not so successful as it is today. So people are maybe still, as I was mentioning before, we are still impacted, I would say, of this, I would say, pre-industrial form of the society when we didn't have, I would say, we didn't have social media, we didn't have internet. Those are really big changes. Those are enormous changes. We are processing amount of the data that was never possible before to do so. And this is this big difference. Today in Asia, you can find data from America easily. I mean, it's much, you know, you have everything on the table. Which 20 years ago, you needed to go to one library. If you found the right book, you had a really big locker. And then you could test it, and then you could go to another library. So we brought this time in the really, I would say, short period. And now if you imagine how we are processing the data, it means we take amounts of the data that are enormous. We're talking about tera and terabytes of the data, and then we're looking for the best outcomes, which would probably take you several lifetimes if you would want to find, I will say, what is the most beneficial, what was the less successful. We're talking about millions and millions of studies, and we are comparing them. It's really difficult to find the form of the work like this. And again, every hospital is probably successful, but you will still notice the difference. One hospital is going to deny that something is possible, another hospital is going to treat you in the matter of the minutes. And this is the system what we are working currently on. It means we need data, we need to become sufficient. And we need to learn from everyone something. Yep. Every society has something successful, We have United States of America, which are super successful. We are in the big economical, I will say, competition with China. But this is good, because this is drive for them as well, and we are learning from them. We are learning from Brazil, we are learning from Russia, we are learning from everyone. And you cannot imagine what kind of data program is this behind. And when we bring this towards the policies, we have the reasons why we say this is the best way how to do it, and this is the best way what we need to do it. And I really hope that the system is going to start functioning as well in the United States as soon as possible. So we somehow eliminate, I will say, at least those negative outcomes from the hospital, because they are unnecessary. We don't need to repeat all trials that we already went through. We don't need to go, I will say, through all nightmares that we already went through. We have results, we have the tests. We can use this data to perform much better as we did until now.
information. During the pandemic, as a nurse within the hospital, this is how we were able to gather the information that we needed with the COVID, with the symptoms, the early on symptoms. We saw, like the physicians, they were collaborating with physicians that was in another country. They were coming united to find out what is happening with your patients there, what symptoms are they having, and this is what we're doing. They were constantly calling, not calling just on the phone. We were able to visually see them from our phones and iPads and different technologies that we had to be able to converse, to figure out what do we do and how do we do it? What are you guys seeing? And they would tell us. And this is how they were able to retrieve the data from all over the world, from the hospitals, of what was happening, what was going on, with so many percentages on the vent because of this is happening to them. And they were able to communicate and educate back and forth, and that is how academia, we were able to compile all the information that we now have about what happened to our hospitalized patients. So when we went into the second year, that's how we knew statistically those that went on the vent were prognostically probably would not come off the vent. So we started transitioning them off the vent, not really letting them stay in the hospital if they didn't have certain symptoms, especially with the respiratory, if they were able to breathe and you're not deciding and certain things that was significant. Though that data that we retrieved in that year going into that second year helped us significantly to be able to combat that COVID.
So on that note, like, just make sure your data is equal and that you're not just excluding people because you want your research bands to look better and you only have white people in your sample. I'm still angry.
I have a quick question here. So as we were going through this is third day of our conference here and hearing everybody. Okay, 10 day. 10 day. Anyway, what came to mind right now is that we spoke a lot about different ways to change the education system and also med system or healthcare systems, as we are coming from different countries. And as Igor was talking about rules and regulations and all that advocacy, right, in this. So, and his name of the firm is System of All. So it came to mind that actually he is the main point for all of us that came here to make changes with different businesses in different countries. I think that his firm, so my question to Igor is, as you work with different governments in different countries and all that, right? What will be the first step or one step that all of us can take to empower advocacy and change these rules and regulations globally? Or maybe another question will be how US can do that here, or how South Africa can do it. Yeah, one market can do it.
I would advise you, do not go to the activism. Don't glue yourself on the street in front of the embassy. It's not going to help you a lot. So
we were not trying to do that. No, it's a real question.
Thing is not the question is really realistic, because we have mass of people that they are trying to protest, but we have mass of people that they are actually bringing us the quality feedback, and this is what governments and everyone needs.
Feedback and data.
Everyone,
right?
It means every one of you is, as I said before, you are the one part of the big puzzle, and depends what you focus on. This is your wish. You can work with the government, or you can work on the local scale. But exactly what you feed back to the government is going to give to the government the mirror. It means what kind of information you get and what they're getting back. And this is how they will measure the weak points. And the more you are following the legacy, it means the legislation and the regulation, more successful you're going to be and more successful feedback is going to be. It's like, I will say it's one type of the, probably you all went through the company analysis or the SWOT systems, etc. So it's really simple. You make the analysis of your company. You can do it by yourself. You can hire someone, and you literally estimate the points what exactly you are, where exactly you stand, where exactly you're going to. You can compare yourself with competition on the market. You can compare where exactly you currently stand against the policies. So you can, important is that you estimate yourself. When you estimate yourself, then you will have the position where exactly you're standing. And when you have position where you're standing, then you can see where you're going, what is there still necessary to complete. And when you will find those missing parts, then you just follow again. You follow the new regulation. Regulation is always going to update. If you look, you guys know the policies of regulation, sir. You have always like new updates. There's like date, etc., and then why is policy, I will say, updated, and then conclusion and so on. So the best way is do not break the law. Do not make the panic, do not cause the stress, do not break the regulacy. It means bring the real feedback to the government. They will take it into consideration. 100% sure they need this feedback. Your proposals are always heard. It means they take mass of the data, they go through this, and they bring out the best. Again,
are they always heard, you said?
Yes.
I don't think so. So I'm gonna be realistic. I'm gonna talk from advocacy, boots in the streets, everything, straightforward. You know, because one thing that I have learned, and I said it was gonna take me about 5 to 10 seconds. The main thing, how can you get people to hear the message? We have to first become the first partakers to start the message. Started in our local communities. Yes. Once we get the communities buying into it, get the state on board. Once we get the state on board, then we got a representative from the state that can be the voice for us. And then when that representative speak on our behalf, then the government begins to change. Because we can't get into the doors of the government as a normal person. They're gonna look at me like I'm an idiot. If I stand out there chanting, they ain't gonna hear what I got to say. But at the end of the day, because I've been on both sides. I've been that person that was on the street, and I've been that person that when I go into a government room, I make them listen to me, because I'm not just coming from just a person that's not educated. I'm coming from an educational standpoint, and I'm bringing facts. This is what happened to the people. I am speaking for the people, and here are the people who represent what I'm speaking on. And that's how you make a change. You get the community, then the state, and from the state, you get a representative from the state part who can talk to the government, because an average Joe cannot make a change on a governmental level unless you have a support from the people.
Basically, my really quick and dirty is I've always believed it's extremely hard to change the rules of the game without winning, or at least being in the winner's circle. They have to at least think you are a threat, and they're like, oh. And so on that note, play to win and make good trouble. Because the laws are not, I disagree with him, those laws are not all even.
I did it, and I didn't have the support. I mean, I'm not saying it was easy. It means the story of the Havana, everything what we were doing, this is still going to come out in the public. It means we are going to have, obviously, a big movie around this and etc. But it is possible. But now, of course, how fast, how sufficient you want to be, how tough you are, it is possible. It's not the easy way, but it is possible.
Thank you, families.